Well, hello, everybody. I'm sorry if you suffered through that so-called debate between Trump and Biden that we just had. It was a fraud. And of course, the exchange back and forth was a fraud if you were looking for serious debate. But let's talk about the debates themselves, just how the whole thing was set up. That's a fraud. As Chris Wallace said at the beginning, it was sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. Sounds official. Sounds like it might be a government agency, a nonpartisan public service. The Commission on Presidential Debates is a private corporation controlled by the Democratic and Republican parties. They set it up in 1988 and pushed aside the League of Women Voters. What happened then was the Democratic candidate Dukakis and the Republican candidate George H.W. Bush wrote a contract with each other, and they handed it to the League and said, this is what we're going to do. And the League said, oh no, we're hosting the debate. You answer the questions. We decide the moderators, we decide the topics, and so forth. So the Democrats and Republicans got together and formed the Commission on Presidential Debates so they could control the whole thing. And that's just like the whole two-party state we've got. We have elections administered by partisan hacks from both parties, unlike any other country in the world where you have independent, nonpartisan commissions. So like when they knocked the Green Party off the ballot, it's partisan. You know, at the Attorney General, Secretary of State level, at the election board or election commission level, and in the courts. They vote strictly on party lines because it's not about what the public deserve. Like we got 3 times the signatures we needed in Wisconsin, 2 times the number we needed in Pennsylvania. And when they decide, it depends on which party has the majority when we get to the courts on the bench. I mean, this is a travesty. So I'm not going to go into detail, but there was a memorandum of understanding that Trump and Biden negotiated and handed it to Fox News. That's how this debate. Now, we haven't seen that memorandum of understanding. They're supposed to be secret, but we've had them leaked in the past, like in 2012. Romney said, no moderators from MSNBC. That was one of his conditions. And I was just reading how back when this was what a demand they made on the League of Women Voters. This is when they were independent. In 1980, John Anderson, a dissident Republican, was running an independent campaign and getting a lot of support. And Carter said, if he's in, I'm out. League of Women Voters said, we're hosting a debate. Anderson, Reagan, and Carter invited. Carter stayed away. Reagan debated Anderson, and everybody thought Carter was a chicken. And that was a consequence because it was an independent civic organization. Now, what happened today? The Green Party's on the ballot in 30 states. We're a write-in in all but 4 states that don't count write-ins. On the ballot, we have 381 electoral votes. 73% of American people can vote for us. And on the with the write-ins, 96% of the American people can vote for us, and that's 514 out of a possible 538 electoral votes. A good criterion for debate inclusion would be if you're on enough ballots to get a majority of the electoral college and win the election, you should be in the debate. So that would have made it a 4-way debate with the Greens, the Libertarians, and the Democrats and Republicans. And I think it would have been a lot more interesting and constructive. Instead, we got this miserable thing we just witnessed. I mean, this was like a bad high school debate. It was embarrassing. And I would conclude that nobody won this. They both lost. It's like 2 old guys in their 70s acting like immature high school people, particularly Trump. I mean, somebody should have said, shut up, Trump, and told him he doesn't respect anybody. He has no decency, and giving him a scolding. Instead, you know, Biden's like looking at the moderator, what are you going to do? And the moderator saying, please, please, please. I mean, somebody should have told him to shut up and at least made that clear, because he was running around like a spoiled brat. And I don't think it reflected well on him. I think he's trying to delegitimize the whole process because he's losing. And at the end, you saw him, you know, questioning the whole integrity of the vote. But here he wasn't questioning the whole integrity of everything. I don't think he won any new voters. You know, if the suburban women that are flipping from Trump, you know, white women flipping from Trump back to the Democrats with Biden, He wasn't trying to recruit them. I mean, I think those women were offended. So I think what he's really trying to do is undermine the whole process. And what we saw tonight reflected what we've got in this country now. It's called negative partisanship. You know, the Biden supporters aren't too enthusiastic about him, but they hate Trump. And on the other side, you know, they buy the line from Trump that, you know, they're coming down to burn down the suburbs. And so it's a fear thing. And it's a racist thing in some cases. And so it's negative. People don't vote for their party, they vote against the other one. And I think that's what we saw today. So I had a fourth point I wanted to say before I got into the details, I think, but my notes are kind of scribbled. Maybe I got my points there just to open up here. Oh, just on the background of the Commission on Presidential Debates, there's a great website called opendebates.org. George Farrell's been working on this for years. There's a book called Open Debates. You go there, you can find out how fraudulent this whole process is and what the history of how we got the presidential Commission on Presidential Debates, and also some good reforms to the process. So, you know, if the Greens had been in there, we have something constructive to contribute. We have real solutions to life or death issues. And we're not into, you know, denigrating the other side. We're into presenting positive alternatives. And I think the American people, polls have shown us in previous election cycles, they want the third and fourth party candidates in there. They want to hear more options instead of this, you know, two parties that everybody hates, and you know, they're all losing support. So the topics, the first one was the Supreme Court appointment. And Trump basically said, yeah, we're going to ram this through because we can. We got the presidency, we got the Senate, and like, what are you going to do about it? And every time Trump opened his mouth, Biden opened his mouth, Trump called him a socialist. I mean, the red baiting, I mean, that's the way. I know Trump practiced this ahead of time. He said he wasn't practicing being president was practice, but it's clear he was coming out and he's going to red bait Biden and just try to roll him over by all that interruption. I thought the Biden response was weak. It wasn't clear. And in comparison with what they did to Merrick Garland, unless I missed that, because I was getting phone calls during this thing, if he didn't mention, you know, Merrick Garland and how he was stonewalled, didn't even get a hearing from the Republicans for almost a year, that contradicts Trump's argument. And I didn't hear that from Biden. Maybe I missed it, but what I did hear was typically with Biden, it's not a clear response. You can remember at the end what his main point was. My response would have been, there should not be an appointment now, like when Lincoln didn't appoint somebody when he's coming up on the 64 election. Around this time, he said, you know, the election's too close, let the people decide, and then we'll make the appointment. And I think that respects the American people. We know the public opinion polls, people think that's right. Even Trump supporters think it's unfair to ram this through. A lot of them do, or at least a lot of Republicans. But what I think we should be demanding is that the Democrats don't roll over for the Republicans on this. I think they should impeach Trump and Attorney General Barr, because they're trying to rig the election and delegitimize it by all this talk about mail ballots being fraudulent. And you know what they're setting up? They're going to say, stop the count after the election and make Florida look like a warm-up for what we probably going to have in November, where the Republicans, if they think they got a chance of stealing the election by not counting the mail-in ballots that come in after November 3rd or haven't been counted by November 3rd, and Barr and Trump are setting that up. I mean, trying to rig an election is grounds enough for impeachment, and there are plenty of other grounds for both of these people in terms of contempt of Congress and undermining investigations. And, you know, Trump's got a rap sheet a mile long, and we're finding out more and more all the time. So if there's impeachment, that takes precedent over a Supreme Court, hearings and confirmation. Impeachment, if the House would bring it forward, has to be the first thing dealt with. And then the Democrats can drag the time out on that by demanding a roll call every time unanimous consent is asked for on procedural things. I mean, the Democrats could fight back. And right now, I heard Dick Durbin is second in charge of the Democratic Senate, basically saying there's nothing we can do. They're going to roll over for the Republicans. And this is, you know, the election's going to be too late to make a difference on this Supreme Court appointment. So I didn't see any fight from Biden on this thing. It was basically, he kind of said it's wrong. Let's let the people decide. But he didn't offer a strategy for stopping Trump, who said, we got the power and we're going to do it. What are you going to do about it? Well, Biden's not going to do anything about it. That's a problem. And then they got to COVID. And of course, Trump's blaming China with a bunch of racist innuendo. And I wrote a question mark in my notes, like, what was Biden's response? I mean, what he did, which he did in a lot of these questions, is say what Trump did wrong. Well, Joe, what are you going to do right? And, you know, what we've been talking about in our campaign is invoke the Defense Production Act, get the testing up, the contact tracing up, employ these unemployed people doing that, and then isolate those exposed or infected. That will suppress community spread, and then we can go back to work and back to school safely. Right now, we got high unemployment. Children are basically missing a year of school, and we don't know what's going to happen. They may be going to school and getting infected, or they're at home trying to do it on the computers, and not everybody's got access to broadband. It's a real problem, and we shouldn't be in this position, but we are. But I didn't hear a clear answer from Biden on, you know, what are you going to do about it? And the other thing is, of course, Biden's opposed to this, is Medicare for all, at least during the emergency, because people, it's $35,000, $45,000 if you get COVID getting the treatment. And some of the bills, if you really get in the hospital and are there for a while, we've heard reports of over $1 million. You know, that's with Obamacare. So, you know, we need Medicare for all. And of course, Biden told Bernie Sanders in that last debate that that was irrelevant to the COVID crisis. I think Biden's irrelevant to the COVID crisis, if that's what he believes. And then they got into healthcare as part of that COVID discussion. And Trump said a bunch of lies about what he'd been doing to improve healthcare. He hadn't done anything. He doesn't have a plan. As Chris Wallace asked him what his plan was, and he said he'd done a bunch of things that he really hadn't done. And then Biden promoted the public option. And I wasn't there to point out that costs more than Medicare for all, because you're keeping the hundreds of insurance companies there and all the back and forth red tape that consumes a third of the healthcare dollar. And you're ending up with a more expensive system that covers people less and they pay more for. And the efficiency of a single public payer is the medical procedures get paid for by that single public payer. And it's a lot simpler administratively. And you can use those savings to cover everybody and cover all medically necessary services. Of course, we want to go beyond that, bring it under community control, and take the expansion, the profit-oriented institutions out of it, the private hospitals, make them public, make public clinics, have doctors, instead of working fees for service where they try to maximize the fees, or the organization they're with, the hospital, wants them to run a lot of people through to get fees, or add treatments that people don't really need, or tests that they don't really need, to maximize the fees. You pay them a salary as public employees, and then they can focus on healthcare and not all this other bureaucratic requirements. And then we elect healthcare boards that can hold the whole system accountable and make sure communities underserved have a voice so they can get, you know, the medical resources they need. And we end this stupid competition where hospitals in the same market are competing for customers. So they're bragging about the MRIs they got. And then in the poor neighborhoods, they don't have doctors and clinics. So that's what community control would bring. So we're calling for a community controlled national health service. Let's socialize not just the payment with a single public payer, but the delivery. And to say socialize, it means to democratize it. Of course, Biden wouldn't even know to correct Trump when he's calling Biden a socialist that we're talking about economic democracy. Biden doesn't know any more what socialism is than Trump. And if I'd have been there, I'd say, Trump, you got the wrong guy. I'm the socialist. Talk to me, and I'll teach you what socialism is. But this fraud excludes us. And we could win the electoral college, theoretically. So why are we excluded? Because they don't want to hear from the alternatives. Then they got to the economy. Oh, boy. So Trump's bragging about a record rebound. I'm in Ohio. I was protesting the debate with climate justice and racial justice demonstrators being available to the media. I did get some coverage, not network or cable, but the Cleveland Plain Dealer, some college newspapers, one of them iHeartRadio right-wing guys called me beforehand. Actually, he kind of liked what I said, even though he didn't agree on the policy. He liked the way I said it and the honesty with which I said it. And I focused on policy. And so that was an interesting discussion. So we got some media out of it. But I had been in Columbus at the State House earlier talking about the Green New Deal as the way we recover the economy. And I pointed out that Trump goes around saying he has a manufacturing miracle. Come on now. We were losing manufacturing jobs here in Ohio before the COVID. And since the COVID, 44,000 jobs lost since February in manufacturing. And Trump has the nerve to go around and lie about a manufacturing miracle. And he's the one that caused the economy to collapse because he didn't have the common sense to listen to the public health advice and test, contact, trace, and isolate in order to suppress community spread so we go back to work safely. Instead, he blew up the economy, tried to get people to go die for the Dow, going back to work before it was safe. We got 200,000 people dead. We're 4% of the world's population, and we got 25% of the COVID deaths and infections. That's what Trump did to the economy. He's got a lot of nerve. And then I pointed out both Trump and Biden believe in trickle-down economics. Trump is give straight-up tax breaks to the rich. Biden is give subsidies to the corporations. That's his Build Back Better program. Well, the money don't trickle down to the working class because with 45 years of stagnant wages and housing and healthcare and college costs going through the roof, people can't afford to buy their products. They're barely making ends meet. There's demand is not there. So you get the rich people more money. The theory is they'll invest in new productive assets that creates jobs. But the demand isn't there. So what do? They buy stocks, bonds, commodities, real estate, financial assets, which just rearranges and concentrates further ownership of the real productive assets we got. Trickle-down economics don't trickle down. And Biden and Trump are in the same camp. That's what the capitalists do. When they can't make money through their so-called free market, they get the government to subsidize them. The Green New Deal does something that not even the left wing of the Democratic Party can even fathom anymore. It's something we did during the New Deal. The government directly employed people. The government built things. And we really did it during World War II when the federal government took over a quarter manufacturing capacity in order to turn industry on a dime into the arsenal of democracy in order to defeat Hitler, Tojo, and Mussolini. And they can't even think in those terms now. Even the progressives are like, well, let's give tax breaks and incentives for renewables and so forth, rather than an eco-socialist program of we're going to do it in the public sector, especially in energy, transportation, and manufacturing. So we transform all productive sectors, not just energy production, but manufacturing, agriculture, buildings, and agriculture to zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions and 100% clean energy. That's what we need to do. That's the Green New Deal. That's not only a climate recovery program, now it's an economic recovery program. That's a positive program that we could have put forward. And I'll get to what Biden said about the Green New Deal in a minute. And the other thing I'll say about Biden is there's the HEROES Act. It's not what we would do. It doesn't go as far as we would do. But it does provide for that $600 unemployment insurance supplement from the feds that people really need. It does provide for aid to our broke-ass cities and some of our state governments. My city couldn't open school pools this summer. They did a GoFundMe to try to open a pool so the kids would have some place to cool off and with some adult supervision, you know, in the rec department. I mean, that's where we're at, and it's getting worse. That's in there. There's aid to the Postal Service, which Trump is trying to undermine to screw up the mail-in balloting. I mean, this is unbelievable what's going on. So Biden could have beat up Trump on the HEROES Act. You know, Trump, why don't you and McConnell get with the Democrats and provide some relief for the people who are suffering? They can't pay their rent and their mortgages. And they're wondering what's going to happen when the moratorium's in and the rent and the mortgages come due. They can't find good jobs, particularly if they came out of the restaurant and hospitality industry. That's still shut down pretty much. A lot of small businesses have gone out of business. They haven't provided the relief. Why didn't Biden challenge Trump and put it on him? I mean, that's the Democrats' program. He can't even defend the Democrats' half-ass program. It's not enough, but it's better than nothing. And right now, we're going to get nothing till the next Congress. And I don't know what we'll get if, it's the Republicans still in the Senate, but the odds are that won't happen. So, that's another thing, that Biden just missed an opportunity to punch Trump's teeth out, which would be a good idea, so he couldn't interrupt so much. And then they got to race and violence, and this is really disturbing. Biden had no program. I mean, his first answer was, we'll form a commission. We'll get the law enforcement people together and try to figure this out. And then he said, I'm opposed to defunding. In fact, he didn't say this, but he wants to put $300 million more into local police departments from the federal government. And then Trump, he did his law and order thing. At the same time, he tried to nail, and I think he did actually nail Biden for being the author of that 1994 crime bill, which really contributed to mass incarceration. Biden didn't respond to that. He just let that go. And then Trump, he was asked point blank, will you refuse or will you condemn the white supremacists who are, the militias that are doing violence? And Trump ought to say it's all Antifa. And his own FBI is saying, no, the biggest terror threat are these white terrorists. And then he said, well, I'll tell the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by. That's not condemning the white supremacists. That's like permission. Okay, don't shoot anybody now, but be ready. We got an election coming up, and these people are threatening to cause mayhem in that case. So, there's Biden, and then Trump didn't call him out on that. Now, of course, on the race and the violence question, what me and Angela Walker are talking about is community control of the police. We can't just reform use of force policies when the police can get away with assault and murder. We have a law in New York City since 1993 that chokeholds, police can't use chokeholds. But that didn't save Eric Garner 20 years later. And here we are 7 years later, and there's still not justice for that family because Eric Garner was, choked to death. Everybody saw it on the TV. So community control of the police means elected commissions or even commissions selected by lot. So you're going to have political influence from the police unions and the real estate industry and so forth to shape these police commissions, would really represent the people with the power to hire and fire the police chief, set the policies, clean the racists and the sadists out of these departments, and then investigate and discipline misconduct independently of internal affairs of the police department. As long as that's who does it, and these review boards just can give guidance, and they're appointed by the politicians that set these police departments up anyway, things won't change. So you get the murders, you get the assaults, which happen every day, and you get these rackets like civil asset forfeiture, where the police go and grab people's property on, before there's been due process. And if you're found innocent, it's hard as hell to get your property back. And of course, that is a huge problem. So community control of the police. How about we legalize marijuana instead of putting people in jail for that, and then decriminalize the hard drugs and do like they do in Portugal. You don't get a criminal charge if you have a hard drug for personal use. You get an appearance ticket. And you meet with a doctor, a lawyer, and a social worker. And they look at your situation. Are you addicted? Do you need drug treatment? Is your life unstable? Would a good job stabilize it? Then are you using drugs to cope with another problem? Do you need some kind of counseling? Or do you need a combination of that? They try to help the people that are using these hard drugs. And the result has been HIV is not spreading. They don't have deaths from overdoses. The street-related drug crime is, or the drug-related street crime is radically reduced. And actually less people use hard drugs. They've been doing this in Portugal since 2001. That would be a program that would reduce the bad consequences of drugs. We should treat it as a health problem, not a criminal problem. And we particularly need to do that now with this opioid epidemic, which last year before the pandemic slowed down a little bit, but since people have been locked up and coping with problems, we've had more overdoses from opioids. The epidemic is back. So this is the kind of program we need. And then Biden got asked, he said, I don't want to defund the police. I don't think he said it, but he said earlier, I got $300 million more for the local police departments. And with answer them, I've been saying, yeah, we need to rearrange or reallocate a lot of those resources from bloated police budgets to social services, but there's not enough money in police department budgets to pay for what's needed. Housing for the homeless instead of vagrancy charges. Drug treatment for the addicted instead of drug charges. Mental health counselors for people having a mental health crisis instead of clueless cops that don't know what they're dealing with and sometimes shoot people who really just need some talking to and to, come out of their situation. So, but there's not enough money in the police budgets to do all that. That's why we're saying you can call it reparations, you can call it a Marshall Plan for the city, but we need to do a multi-trillion-dollar, multi-year program investing in housing and jobs and schools and healthcare in racially oppressed communities that have been segregated, discriminated against, and exploited for generations. And that's getting at the roots of the street crime problem, which was discussed. The shootings have gone up this year, even though violent crime has been, and property crime has been going down since about 1990, pretty steadily. But it did come back up in this pandemic. But you look at where that's concentrated, it's in areas of concentrated poverty because people are poor and they're hopeless. And sometimes don't have that much sense of self-worth, which they project on other people, and you get, all these shootings and crime. So that's a program to deal with the roots of crime. So we got some answers to the racism and street violence. And, Biden basically had no program, and Trump, used the usual law and order thing, which is code language for, beating up the black people. And, that plays with some quarters, but not the majority of Americans. But that's the play Trump is making. And this was really pathetic. Then they asked, well, what's your answer to the question, why elect me? Which, if you ever run for office, that's the most common question you get from, editorial boards and reporters and so forth. And Trump told a bunch of lies about his presidency being the best ever, including the economy, which is in the doldrums. And he said he beefed up the military and he bragged about how many judges he got elected. And then he blamed Biden for not appointing judges. And Biden didn't even come back. McConnell stopped us. He held up confirmation in the Senate. I mean, I don't know where Biden's brain was when that came up, but he didn't have an answer for that. And then Biden's answer to why elect me was to say how bad Trump was. And yeah, Trump is bad. Everybody know that. He's already said it a bunch during the debate. Here's his chance to say, here are the good things I'm going to do for us. And he didn't say it. Biden didn't have a positive program. We got a positive program. We got a Green New Deal. We got an economic bill of rights. We want Medicare for all. We got peace initiatives to deal with this new nuclear arms race. We want instant runoff voting and the whole question of spoiler in elections. We want to replace the electoral college, have a presidential election by a national popular vote with instant runoff voting. We want to free the political prisoners and the publishers like Assange charged for publishing and Snowden charged for revealing that the government was breaking the law, as the courts recently affirmed. And even, people like Holden Obama said, Snowden did kind of force us to deal with some issues here that was probably a problem. Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, all these old Panthers that are elderly people now and are serving longer for whatever they're convicted for than other people for political reasons. I mean, I could go on. We got a lot of positive programs. And that's, if I'd have been asked that question, I would have presented some highlights from that. And then they got to climate change, which wasn't supposed to be a topic, but I'm glad they got to it because it is obviously a serious issue. And Trump basically pitched it as a business versus environment thing. He said something about carbon, but it wasn't coherent because I don't think he's coherent on what's going on. And he said Biden was for the Green New Deal, and the Green New Deal is going to cost $100 million, $100 trillion. Now, our campaign has the only fully developed Green New Deal budget in the country of any candidate, of even the think tanks out there. And it's $27.5 trillion over 10 years to transform the economy to zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions, 100% clean energy. And we show our homework. You can look section by section, see what we think it'll cost to transform to these new clean technologies and how many jobs it will create. The only one that had anything close to what we're talking about was Bernie Sanders. His was 16.3 trillion over 10 years. But and it looked about the right number because he was talking about getting there by 2050. We're talking about 2030. Although to his credit, the two biggest sectors, energy production and transportation, he wanted to get there by 2030. So we considered that a good program, but he didn't show us homework. We do. And then, you know, this has been the signature program of the Green Party throughout the 2010s. The Democrats took it, diluted the content, the non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal, got rid of the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure, got rid of the phase out of nuclear power, got rid of the military spending cuts to help pay for the Green New Deal, and extended the deadline from 2030 to 2050. And then in the House, Pelosi wouldn't let him vote on it. And in the Senate, the Democrats all voted president except the 4 that voted with the Republicans no. So it's clear we're not getting a Green New Deal from the Democrats. And Biden made that clear tonight, even though he got a little confused in the middle because he said, the Green New Deal is not my plan after Trump said it was going to cost $100 trillion. And then he called it the Biden plan a Green New Deal. That was a gaffe. And then he had to say, you know, when Chris Wallace pointed that out, Biden had to say, I don't support the Green New Deal. So at least we got that clear. You want the Green New Deal, you got to vote green, not Democrat in this presidential election. And then Chris Wallace pointed out something. One of the few things that you can read in the Democratic platform or the Sanders Biden Unity Task Force on Climate is that they committed to retrofitting for energy efficiency and clean energy, 4 million buildings over 4 years. That's the way Wallace put it. I thought it was 5 million over 4 years. But anyway, you do the math, it'll take 150 years because there are 120 million buildings in this economy. 150 years. And we got a climate crisis that we got to deal with in the next decade. The Democrats don't have a serious climate policy. So that's why I say Trump calls climate change a hoax, but Biden acts as if it's a hoax. So at least we got one thing clear. Biden is not for the Green New Deal. And then they got to election integrity. And again, Biden, I mean, all he said was vote. Get out there and vote. Vote one way or another, but vote. Nothing on election protection. And he's sitting next to the guy that's trying to undermine the election. And then Trump said, well, first of all, it's not me, it's Obama. You know, it was a coup. They spied on us. Or they tried to do a coup, the deep state. And we caught him. Oh, really? You know, where are the convictions? But Trump, every time his lips move, he lies. And then he went on this whole thing about the mail-in ballots and fraud and made a bunch of stuff up and exaggerated some other little facts into big lies. And, you know, all Biden could say was that's not true. Now, what we say is we got to get out there and protect the election. If we can be poll workers, because a lot of the older people don't want to go out and risk COVID, and you're younger and, you know, you want to practice, you know, wash your hands and wear your mask. We need poll workers. Otherwise, fewer polling places, makes it harder for people to vote. And in some states, they're going to take those polling places from the Black community. We've seen that over and over again, like here in Ohio. So we got to get out there, be poll workers, be poll watchers. In fact, we were talking with the Greens today. In this state, I've got to sign a form so you can be a poll watcher and make sure people aren't being intimidated and everything's going like it should. And I'm willing to sign those, so we would set up that system. That's what we got to do everywhere. And particularly for the Greens, because we're write-in 17 states, we got to make sure the write-ins get counted or people have the opportunity to do the write-in on election day. And then after election day or starting election day, we got to make sure the vote is counted, because that's Trump's play. Oh, it's fraud. Stop the count, like they did in Florida, but they want to do it all over the country. And we got to be ready to make sure the vote is counted. And then the Green Party, we have a tradition of taking legal action, like we did in Ohio in 2004, like we did in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania in 2016, to make sure the vote is properly counted, or to investigate ways that the election was misconducted. And we were talking today here in Ohio with Green Party lawyers saying, you know, they're ready to help us if we need to intervene legally after the campaign, and our campaign will have standing. And we're certainly going to do that. That's how to protect the election. Biden just said, go out and vote. I mean, that scares me, because they should have their lawyers. He should know about this. They should have their lawyers ready to, you know, help people vote. They should have their poll watchers. And he didn't say anything about that, or tell his supporters to get out there and do that. So it looks like the Greens are going to have to fight for election integrity again. And then, you know, what was not debated? How about an economic bill of rights? Working class life expectancies are in decline after 45 years of stagnant wages, with housing, health care, and college costs going through the roof. And so we got the right to a job, an income above poverty, Medicare for all, affordable housing, lifelong public education, tuition free, and a secure retirement by doubling Social Security benefits so every senior is above the poverty line. We got peace initiatives. There was no discussion of that. And we're in the middle of a new nuclear arms race that has the bulletin atomic scientists moving their doomsday clock the closest it's ever been to midnight. And that hasn't been debated by any of these presidential candidates. Not Bernie Sanders, not Donald Trump, or anybody in between. And this is a life or death issue. And we're trying to make it a top campaign issue. But if they exclude us from debates and the mass media and other forums, it's not being debated. And that's a shame, because the rest of the world's scared to death. 122 nations agreed to the text of a treaty on a prohibition of nuclear weapons. When 50 of them sign it, it becomes international law for those that signed it. And they're up to 43 or 44 signatories. So that's about to become international law for those who signed it. I think the goal of the United States should be to reduce tensions by getting out of these endless wars, cutting the military budget 75%, just having a home-based defense to defend our own territory, not occupy the world with a global military empire, withdraw from these 14 places around the world where our combat troops are actively engaged now. People don't know how many wars we're involved in. And then we got 800 foreign military bases. We got special ops doing all kinds, special operations forces, special forces doing operations in over 100 countries. Trump has escalated the drone strikes and the troop footprint in the Middle East. And then he says, I want to end the endless wars and bring the troops home. But of course, every time he opens his mouth, he's lying. So we have these proposals, and with these peace initiatives, including saying we won't first use nuclear weapons, what we're doing is reducing tension so we can go to the other nuclear powers and say we want a complete and mutual nuclear disarmament. Because we have a nuclear war, nobody wins. We all die. And we would go there with world public opinion, those 122 nations. The International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for getting that treaty enacted. And nobody in this country knows that, hardly. And that's why this debate is a fraud, because really important issues like that won't be debated. You know, they're going to get to foreign policy at some point and military policy, and Trump's going to say, improve this military that you left a mess, Joe Biden. Biden will say maybe again, like he did 10 days ago, I'm ready to raise the military budget. And, the treaties will come up, maybe the Iran deal, maybe this intermediate nuclear range forces, but both parties support the nuclear modernization, which means new strategic weapons being deployed, strategic nukes, as well as tactical nukes being deployed. It's kicked off an arms race. The Russians and the Chinese have responded. This is really a serious problem, and it's not going to be debated, because this fraudulent debate was set up by the two parties, not by civic organizations or news organizations, inviting candidates. So we got a real problem here. And that's why, I think this will be my last point. That's why we want ranked choice voting in the presidential election. So we get rid of the spoiler problem. We get rid of the electoral college that puts right-wing losers when the center-left vote is split. That's the spoiler theory. It actually hasn't happened yet. It could happen. We get rid of that. And the Democrats, instead of embracing that, just want to kick us off the ballot, which actually hurts them because down ballot, we aren't running candidates everywhere. We're more likely than not to vote for the Democrat over the Republican. So they're hurting their down ballot candidates when they knock us off the ballot. The other thing is mostly we bring new voters to the polls. 61% of Jill Stein's voters, according to the exit polls in 2016, would not have voted at all if she wasn't on the ballot. And the Green Party is not the Democrats' problem. It's black voter suppression. That explains Florida. That explains Michigan. Florida 2000, Michigan 2016. Probably explains Wisconsin. And explains why the Democrats lost in Georgia in 2018. I mean, it's happening all over. Greens didn't do that. We didn't do the electoral college either, which kind of is a coup de grace for the Democrats. Instead of going after those things, they go after the Green Party. They ain't too smart because it's not really helping them and it's not solving the problem. But we want to go beyond just ranked choice voting for individual seats. We want ranked choice voting for multi-member districts for legislative bodies so we can get proportional representation in the city councils, in the state legislatures, and Congress. That would really be a game changer. Because if we did that, then the Green Party would be in Congress and the state legislatures and on city councils. Libertarians would probably be on too. We could have a 4 or 5 party system. What we got now is a 2-party state, which is barely better than a 1-party state. In fact, it's probably slicker because it makes it look like we got a choice. When in fact, the rich people choose who the major party candidates are because they have the money primary before the voting primary. And that's where these candidates go out and ask to be invested in like their little startup capitalist enterprises. And some get invested in and then they're taken seriously. So they're in the primary and the others lose out. So by the time we get the vote, the candidates have already been chosen for it. It's like Boss Tweed used to say, you can vote for anybody you want as long as I get to choose who the candidates are. That's what we're getting from the 2-party system. That's what we're getting from these fraudulent debates. And that's why we're running. And I guess my last point will be, you can vote, and I understand why people might do this in a close state like Ohio. Vote for Biden because they want to stop Trump. We all want to stop Trump. But just understand if you're a progressive, you vote for Trump, you vote for Biden to stop Trump, you're voting against Medicare for all. You're voting for a Green New Deal. He just said that tonight. Biden said, I'm not for the Green New Deal. You're voting against these peace initiatives and getting out of these stupid wars. You're voting against what you want. And my argument would be, vote for what you want and make the politicians come to you. Because if you vote for Biden and you're a progressive, you get lost in the sauce. They don't know you're for Medicare for all, the Green New Deal. They're going to take you for granted. And if Biden becomes the president, you've lost your leverage. So, let's hang in there. I think Biden's going to win, and then he's going to disappoint the progressives. And that's the opportunity for the Green Party to step up. It's been tough in this anybody but Trump environment. We understand that. But we just got to be ready when our opportunity comes, which I think is probably going to come soon. So they told me to go for 30 minutes. I went for 45. So I hope that was more interesting and enlightening than this miserable debate we just saw between 2 miserable candidates. So now you got to cool down, relax, go to sleep. And after what you saw tonight, that might be hard, but all I can say is, hang in there, be safe, don't get the COVID, wear your mask and sanitize your hands, and we'll get through this. So have a good evening.